that pace and intensity, keeping in the
value of this, and so they've made sure that you will help bring these people in this series to you. So thank you. If you've worked at Biltmore for any length of time, you know that storytelling is just part of who we are. It's kind of in our DNA, and that's an excellent thing because stories create this emotional connection with our guests. And they're also really beneficial for all of us. It increases our engagement and helps us to see the bigger context and the bigger picture that we're working toward. So today's speakers are going to help fill in some of that history for us. We have Ann Ashley and John Ballard, and I'd actually like you all.
Oh, no. I do a lot better standing. That's kind of what I do.
So I'd love for you all to tell us how long you've worked at Biltmore, what your original work was here at the winery, and what you do today.
Okay. I'm in my 34th year at Biltmore. I actually started at Deer Park doing salad prep and then waitressing, but my first job here at the winery was before the winery opened as the tour and tasting supervisor. And then they were going to hire someone for retail, but that was dragging on. And as I was ordering glassware for the tasting room, I said, do you think we want to sell some of these? And they said, yeah. And then after a few questions like that, we'll just do the retail part. So that was my first job. Oh, and today I do whatever it tells me to do. But my job title is Vice President for Talent and Organizational Development.
And I'm in my 30th year, I guess. My next anniversary will be my 30th. I originally started actually sweeping parking lots here at the winery. That was before grounds maintenance was an estate-wide thing, and before the WD&E crew had even been thought of. So we had to take care of everything here. And I have done a little bit of everything here since. My current title, official title, I guess, is Winery Production, Bottling, and Plant Operations Supervisor, which is a mouthful that says, and anything else that breaks.
All right, thank you. Bill Cecil told a funny story. I don't think it was shared, but recently that his dad, Mr. C, went to sleep one night, had this crazy dream that we should open a winery at Biltmore, and the next morning told Bill and this crew to make it happen. And I imagine it was pretty shocking for the employees here at that time. So my first question is, how do you remember Biltmore's employee base reacting just to the idea of creating a winery on property?
Well, it was a very positive reception in one hand because Mr. C's kind of tagline of what could be more natural for a French chateau than to have a winery. And so from that perspective, people really loved that. It's just like at your house, you clean up when people are coming over. So these buildings were sitting empty, and the best way to reach our historic preservation goals is to open an historic space. That's why behind the scenes at Biltmore House works so well, because they have to keep that clean now because guests see it. So the same thing with the winery. Boo was excited that the dairy facility was going to be restored. There was some pushback, though, about us getting into the alcoholic beverage industry. It wasn't quite as broadly received like it is now, particularly in Asheville. So.
I actually came in 3 years after the winery opened, but I'm pretty familiar with the winery. My dad worked on the estate, and then my brother was employed here shortly after the winery opened. And we really didn't hear anything negative. Even there, kind of a funny story, the weekend that the winery was supposed to open, we had torrential rains. I mean, it was horrible. And of course, the landscape wasn't set, and it there was a mud cascade that covered the front, the fountain, the front circle, and it took a great deal, kind of like every other property that's opened on the estate since, it took a great deal of effort from the existing employees to make it happen and happen on time. And even with that initial or additional workload, there wasn't really a whole lot of, everybody was excited trying to get things to move forward.
I asked this question last time. I'm curious your response. What do you remember as far as your expectations versus the reality for things like the guest experience and how things would flow and bottles sold, guest count, things like that? What was the expectation and what actually happened?
Well, surely Bill told this story about his dad saying our initial financial pro forma was based on selling 3 bottles of wine to every guest, and as it turned out, we sold 1 bottle of wine to every 3 guests. So that was kind of that expectation gap.
Fortunately, we did have more people than what they thought we were going to have. And that led to years worth of guest comments that felt like they were being herded. And that's what you're still going through this today with the reorganization and allowing people to come in from different directions. It makes it much harder on y'all. But the guest service side of it, it really is worth it, because we had to herd people through here initially.
We really did. The front side, I don't want to repeat stuff Bill said.
No.
So the front end, or this end of what's now the wine shop, there was actually a stage in there. And so our tour hosts were trained to give this brief talk as a gathering mechanism to then bring that group of guests into, you remember this was 2 theaters. And oh my word, the technology, we had 9 slide projectors. Did Bill talk about that? 9 slide projectors that were set in 3 stacks each that projected on screens there and here for both theaters and pulsed. And they had to be perfectly aligned because you didn't have broad screen stuff then. These were literally slide carousels.
Mechanically timed slide carousels
and they had to
begin
run all
with.
day, so by the end of the day, they'd be kind of, we had to reset them every day. And the guests were, they were herded. They were kind of corralled and then put into the theater and then put on the Scholars Walk, and it was.
Well, can you share a little bit more about kind of the guest flow as you remember what that experience was like? If you remember anything about how many or the types of wine, the tastings, anything like that you can recall.
I'll take this one. The guest flow, the front door was the front door. That was the only way in. They came in, we gathered them in tours, did the talk, they came through the tours, and that kind of pulsed things into the tasting room. That worked out well for the tasting room, but not so well everywhere else. And then they went into retail, and I don't know how many of you ever came before this courtyard was filled in, but retail used to be the show kitchen over there and the room where the registers is. That was it. We had 2 cash registers right at the doors leading out into the bistro. And the biggest issue, I was mostly a retail person, although I worked everywhere as needed. The biggest issue we had is we could not ring fast enough to get the guests through on days like we expect today. And that was pretty much our busiest day at that time. We didn't have 10,000 people days. 5,000, 3, 4, 5, even Christmas time. That was a huge day. We did everything we could to keep things going. We'd have somebody ringing cash register. Of course, we didn't have barcode scans at the time. Most of the products were not barcoded. And we'd have somebody ringing, somebody wrapping, and somebody bagging right there, all crammed in together to get people through.
Part of that pulsing meant that we would only let so many people into the front door at a time. So we had a line down the Scholars Walk. You know, we'd have a 2-hour line.
Wow.
I'm not kidding. Down the Scholars Walk all the way down to the road. And so we would have designated staff who would work the line. And your job was just to tell stories and keep people entertained until they could be let into the winery. And just like now, I know if you are working in the tasting room, and we didn't let Bill work in there very often because he was a beer drinker. So I would just say, go wash dishes, and he would do that. But just like when you work in there now, if you've got a favorite wine, it's easy for you to sell. And we had this one kid, we were talking, reminiscing the other day about McCrae Hilliard, who's a real estate guy here in town now, but McCrae was in college then. He loved the Sauvignon Blanc. And I mean, I might not even know he was on the schedule, but when I looked at the sales reports, I said, oh, McCrae was working yesterday.
Can I piggyback on that? The power of that, guys, is amazing. If you have a wine that you love, and you share that passion about that wine, I would say 8 times out of 10, they're going home with that bottle of wine. The power of passion and genuine love is contagious. And so, you know, that Chardonnay is a perfect example. North Carolina Chardonnay is a perfect example. We lead with that, and we share the love, and our sales, and boom. So, well, just please remember that at any time. Have fun. If you love a wine, share the love. Tell them about it. And that does. It's amazing.
And 30 years later, people remember, oh, yeah, that McCrae was working at it.
Yeah.
I love that one.
Do you remember some of the early kind of big sellers and also the early items you sold in retail?
We, at the time, we had a house white wine was probably the biggest seller. I suspect that it was because it was $5.99 a bottle more than because
and it was sweet.
It was sweet. One of the few that were sweet, particularly under Philippe. Bernard's kind of relaxed a little bit. Still leans toward French style winemaking, of course, but and then our product mix was much different than what you have now. Obviously, we did not have the room that you all have now, so it was smaller products. We sold a tremendous amount of Forge Mountain jams and jellies. Forge Mountain is a company out of Hendersonville that do about 25 or 30 different jams, preserves, and jellies, and we had lots of glass out into the courtyard and had glass shelves where we could stack that particular product. It looked good and it was easy to do. We also sold a lot of logo glassware, also because they were cheap, because we were buying in huge bulk. We were selling initially, we had 4 packs of glasses for $4.95. Now, granted, this is 30 years ago, so it's a little bit more now, but still a good deal for a nice souvenir. And we sold 3 packs of wine. Ann and I were talking about it. You all have the little 3-pack boxes that you have now that you just pop open. The first ones we got, you had to fold the bottoms and pop the sides out. And sometimes
you needed an engineering degree.
Yes, it was not an easy thing, and sometimes we would make those. You'd have one person assigned for the day.
Oh, yeah.
Make 3-pack boxes. Get them out on the floor.
That's all we did.
And they were on the floor. Anna spoke a little about Mr. C's vision, but it was a big deal for us as employees, even as frontline employees, to make him happy. It was not just a professional thing, obviously. If you don't make him happy, you don't go anywhere. But it was a personal thing. It was very personal. And his idea of getting 3 bottles into every hand, that was one way we did that as much as we could. We would have those 3-pack boxes. Somebody would pick up a bottle. We'd pick up a box and say, "Do you want 2 more?" You know, that's kind of the way we thought.
And we had little signs around the shop that said, "Drink 1, save 1, give 1 away."
Yep.
Yeah.
Kind of promote.
Yeah, that's good.
To promote the 3-pack boxes. And the night before we opened, John was talking about the mudslide. You know, on the interstate when they do work at night and they have those giant lights, well, they brought in those lights for out front, and pick up dump trucks of gravel because we were scheduled for a huge grand opening. Philippe was there and did the saber thing on Champagne, so the Champagne Tower. The Cecil's minister from All Souls was going to bless the place. I mean, it was a big media event. It was going to be a big deal, and it was this deep in mud. So they brought in these dump truckloads of gravel out there and just packed in the gravel overnight. We were all here all night. We just worked all night, making 3-pack boxes.
Wow.
So in addition to the mud slide and the boxes, what are some other challenges that you remember early on, whether you expected them to happen or they just kind of came out of the blue and you had to figure something out?
Ann and I were talking about this a little bit a couple of days ago, and both of us remember problems with our cash registers. We initially started with a separate, totally separate computer system from what the carriage house had, which meant that we had to reprice everything. We used a 4-digit price code system. They used a 6-digit price code system, so it was double work. Everything that came in, we had to receive and whatnot. It wasn't just transferred. It was doing everything from here. And then this being the building is 100 plus years old now. It was almost 100 years old then. The power is inconsistent at best. Computers do not like that. And we spent a lot of days writing out sales as fast as we could on whatever we could. Later we came up with the crash books that I hope y'all are still using. The notebooks with the receipt-like pages in them. That was actually me. I had a lot to do with that one. But that was by far, from a logistics standpoint, the one thing I remember the most. I'll never forget a supervisor during inventory. We were having trouble with the computers, and he literally hit one so hard that the keys flew off the keyboard. It was that frustrating. He was not a violent person. He was not a big person. But it got to be that frustrating. And that was probably that, and the same kind of staffing issues that I'm sure you all still have, particularly in the shoulder seasons, trying to guess what kind of visitation we're going to have. You schedule a few people and you're going to get bus loads, and you schedule a lot of people and they're going to be standing around twiddling their thumbs. And that was the other, especially then, you never knew in January, February, and March, you could get 500 people or you could get 5. I'm not kidding about 5. I've been here on those days. So that was probably the biggest challenge.
No, I mean, we were flying by the seat of our pants. I mean, so everything was a surprise because we had no idea what to expect. We'd never had a winery on the estate before, and the only retail we'd ever had on the property was slide sleeves and postcards in the Halloween room at Biltmore House. That was retail, and so it was just bowling in the dark.
Yeah.
You might hear a few pins hit, and you go, okay, that's what we're going to throw the ball that way again. So, we just learned every day. I think the staff, they talk about 4-letter swear words. The one they dreaded the most from me was the word test. Let's test this. Oh, that. I think it's probably still there. Yeah.
Do you remember what the training was like for staff working, whether it was retail or, the tasting in the area?
When I started, we walked in the door. Never forget, me and Steve Stanley. I don't know if anybody here has been here long enough to remember Steve. But we went upstairs to the president's room, sat down, and Suzanne McCullough, at the time, or Smith, now it's McCullough, was in charge of training. We got about maybe an hour of background on the estate proper. We got maybe another hour of this is what we're going to try and do, and then it was here it is. That was it.
And that was more training than anyone
Any
else
other
on
department
the
on the
estate
estate.
had.
Yeah, it was basically,
Yeah.
Here you go, you figure it out.
We haven't figured it out, maybe you can.
And that was it. It was a lot of the early days, it was getting people in here to where you had fresh ideas to see what experiences they'd had, and how that relates, how they could make that work in what we were doing here. As I look out over the group here, the demographic of our employees has radically changed from those days. We had very few full-timers. As I remember, I think we had 2 full-time in retail, 2 full-time in the tasting room year-round, 1 crew leader and 1 rank-and-file employee, and then 1 in tours, which was the crew leader. It's only year-round full-time people we had. And by and large, the rest of our employees were college students. We probably ran 80% at one time college students as to other age groups. Now, just looking out, I would say you're probably 60% over 40, and maybe heavier than that. So it was a different feel, and a different idea. What we were trying to do was different. Like I say, the whole idea was to generate new ideas. See how this is going to work.
What about training on the wine itself? What it was, how to talk about it? Was that part of the 1 hour?
No, we did have periodic wine tastings. Sometimes with Philippe, I remember one. I remember several with Bernard. They would come forward and lead wine tastings. We did, I'll never forget, a Thanksgiving wine and food pairing. By the way, the Riesling goes pretty well with pumpkin pie. Where we cooked and brought food in and tried different wines with the different foods.
Speaking of cooking, we were talking about this the other day. I mean, we Biltmore didn't have candlelight back then. I mean, that hadn't even started yet. We did have Christmas at Biltmore, but it was only a couple years old. The only restaurant on the property was Deer Park. So, there were very limited options, and we had a limited budget because, remember, we weren't selling 3 bottles per guest. So we were having to really be tight on expenses. But whenever the team would make budget for the month, I would do 1 or 2 things. If it was warm weather, I would wash everybody's car. So, Sean?
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe this is where we stop.
Well, but this was when the whole drive was open on the south side of the building, and you could pull up to the barrel wash area outside. So, I would wash them back in everybody's car. Then that got to be a little bit much, so I just started cooking lunch for everybody. And
I knew that.
John said he remembered that. I would bring the grill and set it up and cook. But, we did some other fun things. We had this winery Olympics. It was a blast. So, you know how when you're carrying a bunch of wine glasses, how you flip them upside down and you carry them in your hand? So one contest was to see how many you could stack before they fell and broke. And so I think it was like 36.
42.
42. Okay, it was incredible.
Jonathan Anderson.
And then I don't know if you still use those racks to. I haven't seen your dishwasher in a while, but.
Yeah.
Oh, they still have the old green machine.
Over we had the green racks, and we would stack them on a little square thing that had wheels for moving that around. Okay, so we would stack those, and then the traffic circle in the back, it was a relay race, and so you would have one person driving, the other person sitting, and on that run, and then we had you'd have to carry on a tray full glasses of wine and go through an obstacle course. So
awesome.
we played a lot because we really needed to.
Yeah.
We actually sponsored a similar event at Bellshare one year before the end, and did that and invited restaurants from the area
To compete.
to compete.
But we always won.
Of course.
Well, what moments or milestones do you remember where you felt like, okay, we're going to be okay. We're going to make this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We were talking about this. The biggest moment was 12 years in on a 30-year loan note. We got to burn the note. We had missed that 3 bottles per person, but man, we cranked it up, and our sales were phenomenal. And so after only 12 years, we were able to burn the bank note. That was a big deal.
It was bigger than y'all probably realize, because it's pretty common in today's world for the estate to borrow money. But to my knowledge, that was the first time they ever borrowed money against any of the property as collateral. So paying that off was a very big deal.
In 12 years.
Yeah.
And then another milestone, particularly for me, as I've moved through in my career, I remember when we broke 40,000 cases, which is
not really broke them.
Right. Well, I did my part there too, but when our sales eclipsed 40,000 cases, which is almost 500,000 bottles a year, which is, less than 25% of what we're doing now. But it was a very big deal, because I think at that point we knew that it was a going concern. It was growing. It didn't start very far, but it was continuing to grow.
Do you remember any unique or memorable guest experiences? Anything that happened? I'm just thinking about as we came in, they were giving a guest shout out to this group. Remember anything with the guests that was just memorable and made you feel good, like what you were doing was important?
Oh, it happened every day. Ann and I talked a little bit about this. A lot of us felt like concierge. One of the things that we did, it was just part of the job. We had tablets made of city maps that the Chamber of Commerce put out. And I literally carried a pocket atlas in my pocket, because it's amazing how many people can get here but not get home from here. And often these people were very appreciative of what we were doing, suggesting restaurants. I remember one August, it's the only time I ever made tips here, we had just a rash of people that locked their keys in their car. And I know auto mechanics and the way they're made, and I helped a lot of people unlock cars. And there was one August, I made about $250 in tips unlocking people's cars. They get really happy especially if it's raining. If you can unlock their car door in a few minutes. So, well, actually, we had to stop that because we had somebody that got upset with security. They claimed that a security guard damaged their car unlocking. It was. I've always said that it only takes one positive, really positive guest experience to make the day. There have been way more than one. I don't remember a specific, of course you always remember the negatives, but I don't remember a specific positive. But I was in guest services total here at the Gatehouse for a little over 8 years. And in 8 years, I only had one guest that ruined my day. Now, we had some tough days. The day Good Morning America was here was an unmitigated disaster. But,
my goodness. Tom, have you heard the
Okay, I'll let Ann go.
You've seen the videos. Now, this is kind of tragic, but you've seen the videos of the Kent State thing where, the students got shot. All right, so at that point, I not only had the winery, but I also had the ticket office and parking and a couple other things. So I was the only person with keys to the ticket office and could print tickets. People were in line in Biltmore Village because to have Good Morning America on site, you have to let people in free. That's part of the contract deal. So people were in line the night it was like concerts, before. Biltmore Village was gridlocked, and the hospitals were having a hard time getting emergency traffic because everything was was gridlocked. People had to be in place on the front lawn by 5:30. So no one else could come through the gate at 5:30. But remember, these people have probably been waiting in line since 11 o'clock the night before, and they can't get through. We literally had to close those big iron gates at the front archway and park a police car across the exit so nobody could go around it. People were climbing the iron gate and yelling and throwing things. And so I was told I had to go open the ticket office, and we just gave tickets away. If somebody walked up and said, I would say, well, how many are in your party? And they'd say 24, I'd give them 24 tickets. I mean, it was just no questions asked, just here you go, here you go.
I was key at the gatehouse at the time and was the first one in at 9 o'clock at the gatehouse. And those people, they were genuinely angry, and you can certainly see their point, but they wouldn't go to the gate and argue with the guys with guns. They came to Ann and I, and I mean...
So this is 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock in the morning, these people had been basically promised by Channel 13 that they were going to be able to come in for free. And I remember there being a line of traffic. There was a line of traffic to the Ingalls on Haywood Road when I came to work at 9 o'clock. So
we've never had that. We've never had Good Morning America.
It was an experience. That was number one in.
Sorry, it had nothing to do with the winery.
Close to 30 years worth of bad. Good, bad, and indifferent experiences. That was number one.
So when we're in our deepest moments, just think about that.
At least they're not climbing over the top.
What year was that?
Oh.
Would have been 89 or 90, because those were the 2 years I was down at the gatehouse.
It had to have been 89 because I had my daughter in 90 and I wasn't pregnant.
Okay.
That would have really made it.
Would have had the baby in the gatehouse.
The ticket office, yeah.
You mentioned earlier the four-letter word of test. I'm curious, do you remember any tests or experiments that you all thought could work and you tried it and it just was a complete disaster?
Okay, so people were saying they were herded, and so we're trying to think of how do we break them up in smaller groups and make it a little more comfortable for them. So John, given his size, was probably part of this. So the tasting room counters we had back then, we had them originally designed so you could get up underneath them and unlock them into pieces and roll them out so you could empty the tasting room. So we moved them out. We brought in wine barrels and put little round cafe table tops on them and had little stools like this around. Did you have to?
Yes.
And so we thought this would be great, and then everybody will have a section, like if any of you have ever been a server in a restaurant, and you have, this group of tables is your section. And sounds nice, doesn't it? Word.
I didn't want to leave.
They did?
They were parked.
Yeah.
So then you'd end up with a line down the stairs because the way to get in was the old, and through the tunnel. And that didn't work. But we tested it.
Yeah.
My wife actually worked in the tasting room at that time. I still hear that story about once a week. So it was an interesting experience.
A lot of romances get started at Bill's.
Some of you might understand that if you work here, you don't necessarily have time for a life outside of Baltimore. There were. I met my wife here. My brother-in-law met his wife here. I could list several others.
That's cool.
Well, what has surprised you the most when you think of the evolution from the days you're talking about to where it is today?
Surprise is a tough word because the only surprise is if there isn't one. Evolution is a very good word. because not only have we evolved in the terms of what we're selling, how much we're selling, to whom we're selling, demographics, the number of people, the square footage that we have, it has been a constant change. So surprise is kind of a tough word. Probably the biggest surprise for me, and Ann and I talked about this, is the fact that I'm still here. Not in a bad way.
Just say
Don't take that as a bad thing. But most of us that worked here at that time, it was a means to an end. The idea was to get a job. Those were not as prosperous economically times as we have right now. Jobs were a little bit harder to find. But it was a short-term solution.
Didn't think of it as a career.
It was not not what I would have pictured as my career being. Fortunately, with Biltmore, and I think this is one of the absolute biggest positives of the company. If you are committed and you have a determination, there is a place here for you. It may not be here at the winery, but there is enough diversity in what we do that you can maintain your employment and find something that you excel at.
And I love that idea.
Something that I'm very thankful for.
Because for John and I both, our careers have been, and I always say, a career at Biltmore is like playing on a jungle gym. It's not a corporate ladder. Because you play over here for a while, and then sometimes you have to climb down to get up over here and play there for a while, and pretty soon you've played all around the jungle gym, and you can, move up or whatever. So that's fun. But on the surprise of the question, and again, I don't know that it's that much of a surprise, but with all the growth and the excellent product, and it's just such an amazing place now. The issues are still the same. When you were in that meeting the other day, and we're presenting some of your key issues, and I thought that's the reason people don't come. The research that was done when we opened the winery, it was don't have time, don't drink wine, and I mean the same reason. So there are some things that just haven't changed at all.
Well, you two have been a little more brief than our previous.
Oh, yeah. We have time for Q&A.
We talked about that.
So, do you all have any questions that you would like to ask Don and Ann?
About how many employees did you have, for example, when you were doing the Good Morning America thing?
You mean on the estate
Yeah.
as a whole?
Well, as part of the winery.
As the wine, well, I'm just going to guesstimate and say that the estate, we might have had about 500 employees at the time, and at the winery we probably had 50 to 80.
You're a little bit low on the estate because
Okay.
when I was hired in '88, I was 601,
Wow.
according to Ann
Okay.
or Alice Schweitzer.
Okay.
And here at the winery, I did schedules for years, and I don't ever remember scheduling more than 28 people.
But I remember when I left the winery, though, we had 90. So somewhere in that
It
lifespan,
expanded.
Wow.
it shifted. So.
And I had one other thought. How was it hands-on working with both Mr. Cecil Sr. and Bill Jr.? Did they interact a lot with you?
Mr. C especially. Bill Jr. has always had enough going on his plate since he took over anyway, that he will come through from time to time, but as far as stopping and talking, he has a schedule, an agenda. Mr. C, especially after he retired, but he was still very hands-on, if any of you knew him. At least once a year, he would come by and stop and spend sometimes hours talking about different things, and he was remarkable in his ability to remember names, faces, and ideas. The man knew what was going on and who was doing it. It blew my mind.
But now Bill was very hands-on when he was here. His office was, when you go up the stairs, you have the president's room and an office on the left and one on the right. His office was the one on the left, and then mine was the one on the right. And so, he was here working every day. I was only halfway joking when I said, please go wash dishes. And he would. He'd jump in on the dish line and wash for hours. And he would stay late and help stock wine at the end of the day. And so totally hands-on.
And was he part of this, well, let's test this?
Yes. Yeah. Because we didn't know what we were doing. We had the design plan came from a group called DMCD. Those were initials of the owners or principals of a group in New York who had helped design Epcot Center. So they were kind of world experts in terms of guest flow. And so the idea of doing this pulsing and they helped design the theaters and the show. It was all very high tech at the time. And
they do herd.
Yeah.
That's what they're good at.
Yeah, exactly, at Disney, yeah. And so, so DMCD had designed all that, but soon after we got into it, we realized this isn't working exactly like we thought. So we were on the test cycle.
We like to think we do things a little better than what happens at Epcot. So,
yeah.
John, you touched on sort of the evolution of the winery. Maybe you could talk a little bit about production and sort of that
certainly.
Side of the
we certainly have more selections now than we ever have. Our initial wine list was called a wine passport, and it was a very fancy piece of paper, but it was a one-page piece of paper. It didn't have to fold out into.
It was a trifold.
Yeah, it was a trifold, but I think we had, as I recall, we had two different reds, the Cabernet and the Cardinal's Crest. There were 3 rosés at the time, and I think 5
Yeah, I don't remember.
whites.
I've got that somewhere. I tried to find it for today, but I'll find it and I'll bring it and let y'all look at it.
And in any given year now, we're producing and I'm bottling, labeling, handling about 60 different labels. So that has really changed. The one thing that has not changed throughout is the quality of our wines, and it's been pretty amazing all in all. There has been certainly a continuity of style between Philippe and Bernard. Some things different, but a lot of the same core tenets and values. And we've certainly started early and continued to win awards from the very beginning. So kind of excited about that.
Yeah, Philippe was a brilliant wine master from, he's French, but he had lived in North Africa. His mother used to play bridge with Patton.
And his wife.
And so he was just brilliant. And then when we brought Bernard over, Bernard spoke 0 English, kind of like now. No, I'm kidding. But he really didn't. He studied before he came, and he could answer questions that were technical about wine, but if you said, how about them heels, he'd go, wow. But, the quality of the wine is just phenomenal.
Are you playing pay us not to tell him that you made that comment?
No, he knows it. If I'm
It wouldn't bother him a bit.
I said to him one time, he says, how are you? Or something like that. And I said, hunky-dory. And he looked at me and he said, I do not know hunky-dory. I know Jim Dandy. I think there were a couple of questions in the middle. Yeah.
I was just wondering, when did we start distributing the wine out off-site?
Pretty much from the beginning, but on a very much more limited basis. We started with just North Carolina, and then when I started in '88, We had North Carolina, South Carolina, parts of Georgia, one store in Florida, because Mr. C had a house down there and he liked to see the wine on the grocery store shelf. And it's kind of expanded from there. But really, as far as the explosion that we've seen now, it's been in the last 10 years or so. Up until, when Chris Ryan, some of you may know Chris, worked up front. Chris was still, he was buying 70% of our wine from production at that point. So we were selling 70% here, not on the estate, but here, and 30% elsewhere. Now it's less than 40% from this building, in spite of the numbers that y'all have continued to generate. So that tells you a little bit about what's going elsewhere on any given day.
Were either of you here or involved in the start of the wine club? Do you remember whose idea that was and how that came about?
I was already gone. I mean, it was a concept that we talked about for years, and how to build that cadre of, deep relationship with wine lovers. But I don't remember.
I was already in production, but what I do remember is it had been kicked around since the very beginning. The problem was the ability to get that wine to people. The laws have changed as we have added distributors in different states. We use Southern Wine and Spirits now that has a presence in all 50 states. So that relationship, as well as some serious relaxation in some state laws, have allowed it to be able to happen. So it was kind of an evolution that just took time to let things happen, to allow it to happen.
As we've grown with numbers of bottles, but we've had a limited space, I'm just curious as to how you've been able to address challenges with that. Because when we give tours, our guests are pretty fascinated when they walk into the bottling room and we tell them that we're approaching 2 million bottles.
Space is my biggest challenge.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no doubt about that right now. And if you walk around the building, back in production anyway, you can tell that because every wall has been met by a forklift at some point. That's not because we can't drive, it's because there's not enough room to turn those things. One of the things we've done in '96, there was an addition onto the back of the building that doubled our warehouse space and actually more than doubled our tank space. And we built the warehouse up here. That used to be where the warehouse sits up here on the hill was the employee parking, all of the employee parking. So that was it. That's all we needed. That building was completed in about 2000. I don't remember it exactly. And then for the last 6 or 7 years, we have leased space down at Riverside Warehouse, where our central warehouse is, specifically for wine sales, and we use that space for our distributor orders to where we don't have so many tractor-trailer trucks on the estate at any given time. We can schedule the trucks that are going over there for early in the morning so it doesn't impact our visitation so much. But it is and will continue to be a major challenge, particularly with the historic nature of not only the building here, but this side of the estate, because it's very expensive to build and make it look like it's been here for 100 years. It's not cheap.
Let's take just one more question. Jeremy.
So John, just something like moving forward from a production aspect, what's something that you find like really cool? Because I've been here about 3 years, and I know a bit about production, but I was like, just something from that you noticed from your standpoint, something really cool that we can like take and add to our story to tell our guests, to like that you notice since you're kind of like in the nitty gritty of it like every day.
Well, one thing, if you walk back there, you'll see our big chalkboard in the bottling area. There's 3 little chalkboards beside that I keep our bottling records. The most that we have ever bottled in a single day was 25,444 bottles, which was more than an 8-hour day, especially for me, because we have to sterilize and clean on each end of the bottling day. But that was pretty cool. There's been so many things back there from a technological standpoint. I spent my afternoon yesterday setting up a new 2-channel or parallel filter system. I'm a geek for that kind of thing, so it probably doesn't mean much to many people, but it allows us to filter about 6 times the amount of wine that we were filtering 3 months ago. That's a big deal for me. It probably doesn't relate very well, but the technology is so much different. One of the things Bernard, Sharon, Greg Kriesel, who is the cellar manager or supervisor, and I are going to a huge trade show in Sacramento in January, looking hopefully to replace some of our bottling line equipment that is aging out. There's also starting to be some talk of a second production facility on the property that is actually geared toward production, which would be a nice change. But we would always leave some production here. So it's never going to go away, but we are kind of sizing out what we can do from here.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so
much.
Thank you.
Y'all for the great work you do, and I love hearing that document that you read before we came up.
Yeah, excellent.
Keep up the good work.
I would actually like to thank you guys again so very much. So appreciate it. On that same note, I just got an email from Natalie Hackett, and this was directed to Spencer and Natalie from Donette Miller, our licensing director. I just like to read this because it's just, again, what we do. And thank you so very much for assisting me with the tour last Thursday this is directed to Spencer, for the tour for our VIP guests. Couldn't have done it without you. The Restonic president and brand director joined Furniture Today editor and myself for a lovely evening tour of the winery. Our host, Charles, was spectacular, all caps. He was so well informed and impressed all with his knowledge. His demeanor was fun and entertaining. All of us enjoyed his company and his love for Billboard. By the way, his wine vocabulary and pronunciation of wines was amazing. Please let him know how much we enjoyed the tour and his personal style. I hope you have a blessed holiday at best.
Yeah.
So, thank you, folks. Quick story on Charles. He came to us in a job fair. We're talking about herding. It's like the one opportunity of the year where we get to see lots of people. Many of you kind of met us in that way. And it's a great opportunity, but you don't have a lot of time to sit down and get to know, each other very much. And so when Charles left our table, I looked at Karen and I was like, I don't know. I was afraid of his stamina. Here's this guy coming out of college. He's doing a master's degree. I was like, I don't know. We're going to wear him out. And here he is, a year more later, crushing it. And a model for all of us on how we deliver great guest service and then not only that, but Peter identified him early on and said, I want that guy on my team, and here we are, creating amazing guest experiences for some really big influencers for the company. So thank you very much. So to pick one out of a group of amazing people is very difficult.
It's been hard every month, and it's been especially hard during Candlelight. You guys are all going above and beyond, and you make me like tear up.
Our employee of the month is taking their new role like a duck to water. They always go above and beyond, and they're always helping out whenever possible. They have a great work ethic and are a great team player, willing to help out fellow employees whenever they can, no matter the weather. They're willing to do whatever is asked of them and offer to do extra tasks to help out in different areas. We're so glad to have this person as a member of our team, and our December employee of the month is Danny.
Oh. Yeah, you're an excellent addition, brother. We appreciate you very much. So part of the benefits of being employee of the month is you
Pick your own schedule for a week and you get $50 you can build on that. And Jeff's gonna take from here.
So we just want to recognize the people that actually made it to work to help us on Friday and Saturday. Very appreciated. We got some people that didn't make it, but they called and said, if you'll come get me, I'll work. And I spent 3 hours picking up.
Getting stuck in the sun.
But if you are here Friday or Saturday, I've got a list, and I'm gonna read it real quick. Come get a bottle, we can haul that for Simeon. Just as a thanks for coming in and helping. We really needed every person who possibly could get those things back. It was interesting, to say the least. If I did not read your name and you were here, let me know. Okay. Stephen A., Danny, John B., Mary Beth, James B., Andre, Olivia B., Rachel, Sarah C., Olivia C., Vicky, Janine, Clyde, Terry, Jacob, Bob, Jill, Karina, Jeffrey with a G, Autumn, John W. Martin, Cindy, Garrett, Charles, Paul, Al, Brenda, David P., Allison, Richard, Gloria, Zach, Cherie, Chelsea S. Okay. Well, there's a Chelsea Skiller on fire. Victoria, Cynthia, Maren, Jared, Seth, Andrea, Joe, Michelle, Mike W., Peter, Dan W., Chris W., Gail, Kristen, Katie D., Brooke, Lori F., Diana, Allie, Charlie, Will G., Annabeth, Kelly, Janice, Barbara, Stephen, Ann, Dana, and Spencer.
Guys, thank you so much. What about these things? These mean that one goes here
On the line.
What do you want, water? Yeah, I was gonna go for this. I hear a bell. There's an angel. It's got his wings.
Hey,
come on.
Excellent.
We got it. Yeah.
Wine and biscuits. New Southern. That would be good. It's what it is. Lucas. It's like
Whoa. You can't do that.
HR. Is this your phone?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I was recording.
Oh, now you got everybody cheering. Congrats.